Forget the six-shooters and lever-action Winchesters Hollywood burned into your brain. The real frontier was armed with weapons so strange and so terrifying that history tried to bury them entirely. Air rifles that killed silently from 200 yards, crossbows that punched through buffalo hide, and combination weapons that blended brass knuckles, daggers, and revolvers into pocket-sized killing machines. Today, we're unearthing 15 oddball weapons that rewrote the rules of frontier survival, and number 1 combines 3 deadly weapons into something nightmares are made of. Number 15, the Girandoni air rifle, the silent killer, that explored America. Picture a rifle that could fire 22 shots in under a minute without reloading powder or caps, made absolutely no smoke, and produced barely more sound than a loud cough. The Girandoni air rifle wasn't science fiction. It was 18th century reality, and it helped explore the American West before most settlers ever arrived. Designed by Italian inventor Bartolomeo Girandoni in 1779, this 46 caliber repeating air rifle used a detachable air reservoir built into its buttstock. 1,000 pumps with a hand pump pressurized the tank enough for roughly 40 shots, with the first 30 maintaining enough velocity to kill a man at 150 yards. The tubular magazine held 22 rounds that gravity fed into the breech with each cycling of a simple mechanism. Meriwether Lewis carried a Girandoni on the Corps of Discovery expedition from 1804 to 1806. He demonstrated its rapid fire capability to Native American tribes along the Missouri River, and historians believe its presence helped prevent several potentially violent encounters. The rifle's seemingly magical ability to fire, repeatedly without smoke, or the rituals of muzzle loading left many witnesses stunned. But the Girandoni's complexity was its curse. The air reservoir was fragile, prone to cracking under frontier conditions. Repairs required specialized gunsmiths who simply didn't exist west of St. Louis. By the 1820s, most had fallen into disrepair. Surviving examples rest today in the Smithsonian and various European military museums, their brass reservoirs still bearing the dents of hard frontier use. The Girandoni proved that firepower didn't require fire, and while it faded before the Great Western expansion, the idea of silent, repeating death never left the frontier's imagination. Number 14. The heavy crossbow, the forgotten frontier. Hunter. Long before repeating rifles made their mark, the crossbow had already spent centuries perfecting one thing: silence. And on a frontier where a single gunshot could summon hostile attention from miles away, that silence was worth its weight in gold. Spanish missionaries brought heavy crossbows into the American Southwest as early as the 1500s. By the 1830s, frontier hunters and trappers had rediscovered their value. A steel-prod crossbow with a 200-pound draw weight could send a bolt through a deer at 60 yards without alerting every living creature in the valley. For men trapping beaver along contested waterways, that discretion meant survival. These weren't toys. A well-made hunting crossbow of the period stood nearly 3 feet long with a heavy wooden tiller and steel bow. Cocking required a belt hook or windlass, and a skilled shooter could loose 3 aimed bolts per minute. The bolts themselves, often hand-forged with broadhead tips, could punch through leather armor, thick hide, or the rib cage of any game animal on the continent. Mountain men like Jim Bridger reportedly carried crossbows alongside their hawk and rifles for situations demanding stealth. Accounts from the fur trade era describe trappers taking elk and deer with bolts to avoid drawing attention from competing trapping parties or hostile bands. The crossbow's weakness was obvious: reload time. In a fight against repeating firearms, it was hopelessly outclassed. But for the patient hunter who valued silence over speed, the crossbow remained a deadly tool well into the 1870s. No surviving frontier crossbows have been definitively identified in American museums, but their presence lingers in journals, trade records, and the oral histories of Western tribes who encountered them. Number 13. The Volcanic pistol, the ancestor. Nobody remembers Winchester became synonymous with the American West. There was the Volcanic, a bizarre lever-action pistol that fired self-contained ammunition decades ahead of its time. It was brilliant, revolutionary, and an absolute commercial disaster. But its DNA lives in every Winchester ever made. The Volcanic Repeating Arms Company, founded in 1855 in New Haven, Connecticut, produced pistols and carbines chambered in a cartridge called the rocket ball. This ammunition was truly strange, a hollow-based bullet containing its own powder charge and primer, with no brass case at all. The lever mechanism fed these rounds from a tubular magazine under the barrel, allowing rapid fire that seemed impossible for the era, while competitors were still fumbling with percussion caps and powder flasks. A Volcanic shooter could simply work the lever and keep firing. On paper, it was a miracle. The pistol version held 8 rounds. The carbine held up to 30. A man armed with a Volcanic could lay down continuous fire that no cap and ball revolver could hope to match. Advertisements promised frontiersmen and settlers a weapon that would revolutionize personal defense. In practice, the rocket ball ammunition was underpowered, unreliable, and prone to misfires in damp conditions. The .41 caliber projectiles carried less punch than a standard cap and ball revolver, barely capable of stopping a determined attacker at close range. The lack of a sealed cartridge made waterproofing impossible. Hunters reported wounded game escaping. Settlers reported feeling undergunned against hostile threats. The revolutionary promise collapsed under frontier reality. The company failed within 2 years. Investors fled. Production halted. But one of its major backers, a shirt manufacturer named Oliver Winchester, saw potential where others saw wreckage. He bought the patents and machinery at a fraction of their original cost. His engineers redesigned the ammunition with proper brass cases, sealing the powder and primer against moisture. By 1860, the Henry rifle was born. From there came the Winchester 1866, the 1873, and every lever gun that defined the frontier. Only a few thousand Volcanic pistols were ever produced. Surviving examples in the Cody Firearms Museum and the NRA National Firearms Collection show heavy wear from owners who tried desperately to make them work. Their lever actions are smooth from use. Their barrels show powder residue from countless misfired attempts. They failed as weapons but succeeded as stepping stones toward the gun that won the West. Number 12. The Apache revolver, the assassin's knuckle duster. Imagine pulling what looks like a set of brass knuckles from your pocket. The Apache revolver wasn't designed for honest gunfights. It was designed for the kind of close-quarters killing that happened in dark alleys and crowded saloons. Manufactured in Belgium and France beginning in the 1860s, the Apache was a foldable pinfire revolver chambered in 7mm. The cylinder held 6 shots. The grip doubled as brass knuckles. A folding blade extended from the frame. Collapsed, it fit in a coat pocket. Unfolded, it offered 3 ways to kill a man within arm's reach. French street gangs, called Apaches, made the weapon infamous in Parisian slums. But examples crossed the Atlantic throughout the 1870s and 80s, turning up in the pockets of gamblers, pimps, and hired killers across American boomtowns. Newspaper accounts from Leadville, Tombstone, and Deadwood mention multifunction weapons matching the Apache's description. Its effectiveness was limited, but brutally specific. Surviving Apaches are collectors' prizes today, often found in European auction houses. Their folding mechanisms, still functional after 150 years, testify to the craftsmanship of men who understood that sometimes killing needed to be quiet, quick, and close. Number 11. The Harmonica gun, the multi-barrel oddity. What happens when a gunmaker looks at a harmonica and thinks, I could make that kill people? You get one of the strangest repeating firearms ever produced. A weapon so awkward, so impractical, and yet so fascinating that collectors still fight over surviving examples today. The harmonica gun, sometimes called a slide gun, used a flat steel bar containing multiple chambers, usually 10 to 12, that slid horizontally through the action. Each chamber was preloaded with powder and ball, or, in later versions, metallic cartridges. After firing, the shooter manually shifted the bar to align the next chamber with the barrel. Jonathan Browning, father of legendary firearms designer John Moses Browning, built Harmonica rifles in his Nauvoo, Illinois shop during the 1840s. Mormon pioneers carried them west during the Great Migration to Utah, where Browning continued production into the 1850s. His slide guns were chambered in .44 caliber and offered firepower that single-shot muzzleloaders couldn't match. The concept was sound. Multiple shots without reloading gave settlers an edge against hostile encounters. But the execution had serious problems. The flat magazine made the gun impossible to holster or carry comfortably. The exposed chambers were vulnerable to dirt and moisture, and if the bar wasn't perfectly aligned, the gun either misfired or blew hot gas into the shooter's face. Fewer than 100 Browning Harmonica guns survive today, with examples in the Buffalo Bill Center of the West and various private collections. They never achieved mass popularity, but they proved that frontier gunsmiths were willing to try anything to give settlers more firepower, even if that meant turning a musical instrument into a weapon. Number 10. The Pepperbox revolver. Spray and pray. Before Samuel Colt perfected the revolving cylinder, gunmakers tried a different approach. Why rotate chambers past a single barrel when you could simply give each chamber its own barrel? The Pepperbox revolver was the result. A fistful of barrels that offered volume of fire at the expense of nearly everything else. Pepperbox pistols emerged in the early 1800s, reaching peak popularity during the 1830s and 40s. Most featured 4 to 6 barrels rotating around a central axis, each preloaded with powder and ball. Pulling the trigger on a double-action Pepperbox rotated the barrel cluster and fired. No cocking necessary. Just point and keep pulling. Allen and Thurber of Massachusetts became the most prolific American manufacturer, producing thousands of Pepperboxes in calibers ranging from 28 to 36. Emigrants heading west on the Oregon and California trails often carried them as backup weapons. Their multiple barrels offered reassurance to families who couldn't afford Colt's expensive revolvers. The Pepperbox's problems were legendary. Accuracy beyond 10 feet was wishful thinking. The heavy barrel cluster made the gun front-heavy and clumsy. Simultaneous discharge, where multiple barrels fired at once, was a terrifying possibility due to loose powder migrating between chambers. Mark Twain famously mocked the Pepperbox in Roughing It, describing it as a weapon that couldn't hit anything aimed at, but was deadly to innocent bystanders. Yet thousands were sold, carried, and occasionally used in frontier violence. Surviving Pepperboxes fill museum drawers across America, their rotating barrels frozen by time. They weren't good weapons, but for settlers who couldn't afford better, they were something. And sometimes, something was enough. Number 9. The punt gun. The shotgun that needed a boat. When market hunters wanted to kill ducks by the hundred, they didn't reach for a shotgun. They reached for something closer to artillery. The punt gun was a monstrous smoothbore weapon, sometimes exceeding 10 feet in length, firing over a pound of shot in a single earth-shaking blast. Developed in the early 1800s for commercial waterfowl hunting, punt guns were mounted on small, flat-bottomed boats called punts. A hunter would paddle silently toward a flock of resting ducks, aim the fixed gun at the densest concentration of birds, and fire. A single shot could kill 50 to 100 birds at once, providing enough meat for restaurants, hotels, and wealthy households back east. Calibers varied wildly, but 2-gauge and even 1-gauge monsters weren't uncommon. The recoil was so severe that the entire boat absorbed it, sliding backward through the water. Some hunters lashed themselves to the punt to avoid being thrown overboard. The sound was reportedly audible for miles. Punt guns never truly belonged to the Wild West, but they operated along the Mississippi Flyway and Gulf Coast marshes throughout the frontier era. Market hunters armed with these weapons nearly drove several waterfowl species to extinction by the 1890s. State and federal laws eventually banned their use for commercial hunting, though a few sport hunters kept them into the 20th century. Surviving punt guns exist in collections like the Smithsonian, and various waterfowl heritage museums. Their massive barrels, sometimes over 2 inches in diameter, testify to an era when wildlife seemed infinite and no weapon was too extreme. Number 8. The air cane, the gentleman's silent assassin. On the surface, it was an elegant walking stick, something a banker or railroad executive might carry through the streets of San Francisco or Denver. But hidden inside that polished exterior was a compressed air mechanism capable of firing a lead ball with lethal force. The air cane was the spy weapon of the Victorian frontier. Air canes originated in Europe during the late 1700s, but American gunsmiths produced domestic versions throughout the 1800s. The typical air cane was built around a brass or steel tube concealed within a wooden or bamboo shaft. A knob or handle contained the firing mechanism, while a section of the shaft served as the air reservoir. Most fired projectiles between 30 and 40 caliber at velocities sufficient to kill small game or a man at close range. Their advantage was obvious: silence and disguise. A gunshot in a crowded hotel lobby meant witnesses, police, and scandal. An air cane could be discharged with little more than a muffled pop, and the shooter could walk away leaning on what appeared to be nothing more than a fashionable accessory. Records suggest air canes were carried by private detectives, bodyguards, and men whose business required discretion over firepower. Some surviving examples show extensive wear at the muzzle end, suggesting regular use rather than mere collection. The weapons were never common, and fewer than a few hundred American-made examples survive in museums and private collections. But their existence proves that the frontier's violence wasn't limited to dusty streets and mountain passes. Sometimes it happened in velvet parlors, and the weapon was something no one ever saw. Number 7. The knife pistol, when one weapon wasn't enough. The frontier demanded versatility. A man might need to cut rope, gut a deer, or kill an enemy, sometimes in the span of a single afternoon. Combination weapons tried to solve multiple problems with one piece of gear. The knife pistol was the most common answer. A blade with a built-in firearm for when cutting wasn't enough. By the 1840s, cutlers in Sheffield, England, and gunsmiths in Philadelphia were producing Bowie knives with percussion pistol barrels mounted alongside the blade. The typical arrangement placed a small caliber barrel, usually 31 or 36, above the knife spine, with a folding trigger and hammer near the guard. The user could slash, stab, and then fire at point-blank range. George Elgin patented an American version in 1837, featuring a large Bowie blade mated to a single-shot percussion pistol. The Navy ordered 150 Elgin Cutlass pistols for the South Seas exploring expedition, making it the first percussion handgun officially adopted by any branch of the United States military. Civilian versions varied wildly in quality. Cheap examples were more dangerous to their users than their targets, with poorly fitted barrels prone to catastrophic failure. Quality pieces from known makers commanded high prices and found homes in the belts of scouts, gamblers, and men who lived in close-quarters environments, where a blade arrived faster than a holstered revolver. Surviving knife pistols appear in collections from the Smithsonian to the Autry Museum. Their blades show sharpening marks. Their barrels show powder residue. They were used, not just carried. And for men who couldn't afford to carry multiple weapons, they made brutal, practical sense. Number 6. The Guyot chain pistol, 40 shots of madness. What if revolver didn't stop at 6 shots? What if you could load 40 rounds and keep firing until your ammunition belt ran dry? The Guyot chain pistol tried to answer that question with a design so bizarre, it seems like something from a fever dream. A revolver fed by an external chain of cartridges. Patented in 1879 by French inventor Henri Guyot, the chain pistol used a continuous metal belt of linked cartridges that fed through the action. Pulling the trigger advanced the chain, chambered the next round, and fired. In theory, a shooter could load a 40-round belt and unleash continuous fire without stopping. The reality was messier. The chain mechanism was fragile and prone to jamming. The exposed ammunition was vulnerable to dirt and moisture. The overall weight, with a full chain loaded, made the pistol front-heavy and exhausting to aim. and if a single link in the chain bent or broke, the entire system failed. Despite its flaws, the chain pistol represented genuine innovation. It was an attempt to solve the revolver's fundamental limitation, decades before detachable magazines and semi-automatic actions became standard. A handful were imported to the United States, where curiosity seekers and wealthy collectors acquired them. Fewer than a few dozen Guyot chain pistols survive today, making them among the rarest oddball firearms in existence. Their chains, often corroded and frozen, testify to the difficulty of maintaining such a complex mechanism. The chain pistol didn't change warfare or settle the frontier, but it proved that some inventors were willing to chase impossible firepower even when the engineering couldn't keep up with the dream. Number 5. The Duckfoot pistol, the crowd clearer. When one bullet isn't enough and you're facing a mob, what do you reach for? In the early 1800s, the answer was a pistol that looked like its barrels had been bent outward by some catastrophic accident. The Duckfoot pistol, named for its splayed barrel arrangement resembling a duck's webbed foot, was designed to clear a room with a single trigger pull. It wasn't built for duels or precision shooting. It was built for desperate men facing impossible odds. Typical Duckfoot pistols featured 3 to 4 barrels, arranged in a fan pattern, each angled outward from the central frame at roughly 45 degrees. A single flintlock or percussion mechanism fired all barrels simultaneously, sending a spread of lead balls across a wide arc. The effect was devastating at close range. A hallway, a ship's gangway, a prison corridor. Anywhere men might charge in a tight group became a killing ground. Naval captains carried them to suppress mutinies. When sailors turned violent, officers couldn't afford to fire one shot and reload while the mob closed in. The Duckfoot gave them a single chance to break a charge before it overwhelmed them. Prison wardens kept them for the same reason. Frontier lawmen reportedly tucked them into coat pockets when arresting groups of hostile drunks in cramped saloon back rooms. The concept had obvious limitations. You couldn't aim at a specific target. The recoil from multiple simultaneous discharges was brutal, capable of spraining an unprepared wrist. Reloading each barrel individually took forever, meaning you had exactly one chance to end the fight. And if your enemies were spread out beyond arm's length, you might miss all of them entirely. But in the right circumstances, the Duckfoot was absolutely devastating. Accounts from the early 1800s describe British naval officers using them to sweep boarders off their own decks during close-quarters fighting. A prison warden in Pennsylvania reportedly stopped a riot in 1847 by firing a 4-barreled Duckfoot into a charging mob of inmates. The front ranks collapsed. The rear ranks fled. Surviving examples are rare and highly prized by collectors. The Fraser History Museum in Louisville holds one of the finest American examples, its barrels still splayed at their original deadly angle, the brass frame darkened by age and handling. The Duckfoot was never a precision weapon. It was a statement, a final argument for men whose backs were against the wall and whose only hope was to kill everything in front of them at once. Number 4. The Cochran turret revolver, brilliant and deadly to its owner. The cylinder on a revolver rotates to align each chamber with the barrel. Simple and effective. But John Webster Cochran had a different idea. What if the cylinder sat flat on top of the gun, spinning horizontally like a turret? The result was a fascinating weapon that worked brilliantly right up until it killed its own shooter. Patented in 1837, the Cochran turret revolver featured a radial cylinder mounted horizontally above the frame. Chambers pointed outward in all directions like spokes on a wheel. Each trigger pull rotated the turret and fired the chamber aligned with the barrel. The design allowed for more chambers than a traditional cylinder, with some models holding 9 or more shots. The problem was geometry. In a normal revolver, unfired chambers point harmlessly to the side. In the Cochran design, unfired chambers pointed directly at the shooter's arm and face. If a chain fire occurred, where burning powder from one chamber ignited an adjacent one, the results were catastrophic. Despite this horrifying flaw, Cochran produced several hundred turret revolvers throughout the 1830s and 40s. Some were purchased by adventurous shooters who accepted the risk in exchange for increased firepower. Others were bought by men who simply didn't understand the danger until it was too late. The turret revolver concept died with Cochran's company, killed by its own design flaw. Surviving examples in museums like the Smithsonian and the Metropolitan Museum of Art stand as monuments to brilliant engineering undermined by deadly physics. The Cochran proved that more shots weren't always better, especially when some of those shots pointed backward. Number 3. The bullet crossbow. Silent death on the plains. When a traditional crossbow wasn't lethal enough and firearms were too loud, some frontier hunters reached for something in between. The bullet crossbow fired lead balls instead of bolts, combining the silence of a bow with the terminal performance of a pistol. It was an oddball weapon for oddball situations. Bullet crossbows used a traditional crossbow prod and stock, but instead of a groove for a bolt, they featured a barrel or tube that accepted spherical lead ammunition. Some models used slings or pouches. Others had true barrels with rifled bores. The projectile, accelerated by the bowstring, could reach velocities comparable to a thrown stone, but with far greater accuracy. European sportsmen had used bullet crossbows for hunting since the 1500s. By the 1850s, improved designs reached American shores. Market hunters who needed to take game silently, poachers who couldn't risk a gunshot alerting gamekeepers, and Native Americans who acquired the weapons through trade all found uses for them. Accounts from the southern plains describe Comanche warriors experimenting with bullet crossbows acquired from Mexican traders. The weapons never replaced traditional bows or captured rifles, but they offered a middle path. Silent, powerful enough for small game, and completely independent of powder and caps. Surviving bullet crossbows are exceedingly rare in American collections. Most were used until they broke, then discarded without sentiment. But their existence proves that the frontier's arsenal was broader than any museum exhibit suggests. When silence mattered more than firepower, even lead balls could fly without sound. Number 2. The Windbuches military air rifle, so deadly, it was banned. If an air rifle could explore America with Lewis and Clark, imagine what happened when an entire army equipped with them went to war. The Austrian military Windbuches, a close cousin of the Girandoni, saw actual combat against Napoleon's forces and proved so effective that captured users were executed on the spot. The Windbuches entered Austrian service in 1780 and remained in limited use until 1815. Like the Girandoni, it used a detachable air reservoir and fired 22 rounds of .46 caliber ammunition from a tubular magazine. Trained shooters could fire all 22 rounds in under a minute, reloading only air between engagements. Austrian sharpshooters used Windbuches rifles to devastating effect during the Napoleonic Wars. The weapons produced no smoke, no muzzle flash, and minimal sound. French soldiers reported being hit by invisible fire, unable to locate the shooters even after multiple casualties. The psychological effect was as damaging as the physical wounds. Napoleon allegedly ordered that any soldier captured with an air rifle be executed immediately as an assassin rather than treated as a prisoner of war. Whether the order was formally issued remains debated, but the sentiment was clear. These weapons were considered unfair, ungentlemanly, and terrifying. Surplus Windbuches rifles filtered through European arms markets after the Napoleonic Wars. A handful crossed the Atlantic, where American shooters marveled at their engineering. None are known to have seen significant frontier use, but their legend influenced American air rifle development throughout the 1800s. Surviving military Windbuches rifles rest in Austrian museums and private collections, their brass reservoirs still capable of holding pressure after 2 centuries. They proved that air power could compete with gunpowder on the battlefield and left a legacy of silent death that firearms couldn't match. Number 1. The Lamat combination carbine, the ultimate frontier hybrid. If Dr. Jean-Alexandre Lamat's revolver shocked the frontier with its 9 shots and central shotgun barrel, Imagine what he accomplished when he scaled that design into a long gun. The Lamat carbine took everything dangerous about the original revolver and made it bigger, more powerful, and absolutely devastating at ranges no pistol could reach. Produced in limited numbers during the Civil War, the Lamat carbine featured a revolving cylinder holding 9 shots of .42 caliber, wrapped around a central .65 caliber smoothbore barrel designed for buckshot or a single massive ball. The shooter could switch between rifle fire and shotgun blast with a simple adjustment of the hammer. Confederate cavalry officers who could afford them, and the Lamat carbine was never cheap, found themselves carrying the most versatile long gun on any battlefield. 9 aim shots for engaging enemies at range, then a devastating shotgun blast for close quarters fighting. The combination addressed 2 tactical problems with a single weapon. But the Lamat carbine's complexity was also its weakness. The cylinder was heavy and threw off the weapon's balance. The dual firing mechanism required careful maintenance. Ammunition for both systems had to be carried separately, and the central shotgun barrel, while fearsome, added weight and bulk that simpler carbines avoided. Fewer than 300 Lamat carbines were ever produced. Surviving examples in the Richmond National Battlefield Park Museum and various Confederate museums show the wear of actual combat use. Their cylinders are scratched from holstering. Their barrels show powder residue. These weren't display pieces. They were fighting guns for men who demanded every possible advantage. The Lamat carbine represented the ultimate expression of oddball frontier thinking. Take a proven concept, make it bigger, add more firepower, and accept the complexity. It wasn't practical for the average shooter, but for those who mastered it, the combination carbine was something close to magic. 9 shots, then a shotgun blast, all from a single weapon. In a world where your gun was your survival, that kind of versatility could mean everything. 15 weapons that Hollywood forgot and history tried to bury. From air rifles that explored the Louisiana Purchase to crossbows that killed without sound, the real frontier was armed with tools that defied every Western myth ever filmed. These weren't props or curiosities. They were the survival gear of scouts, assassins, hunters, and desperados who understood that gunpowder wasn't the only path to power. Every one of these weapons solved a problem. Silence when stealth mattered. Firepower when numbers threatened. Versatility when carrying multiple weapons wasn't possible. Their designs ranged from brilliant to suicidal, but each represented the frontier's willingness to try anything that might offer an edge. The guns that won the West get all the glory, but behind them stood an arsenal of oddball weapons that history left behind. Silent, strange, and absolutely deadly.